Smoke rises in thin ribbons against a sky blanketed by stars that shimmer like chipped ice, untouched by city light or warmth. A fire crackles at the mouth of a stone-ringed cave, its glow dancing over the silhouettes of hunters, cloaked in animal hides, faces hollowed by cold and hunger. Their breath fogs the air in pale clouds, vanishing into the stillness around them. Beyond the flickering light, the world is silent, frozen, and vast. The snow-covered earth stretches endlessly, blanketed in death-like quiet, where even the pine trees groan from the weight of lingering frost. This is no ordinary winter. It is a season that has overstayed its welcome, gripping the land with such ferocity that it threatens to erase more than just warmth. What frozen terror arrived to steal the sun for 1,000 years, and how did humanity manage to outlast the dark? Long before it had a name, before calendars or carved gods, the world was ruled by rhythm of seasons, of migrations, of survival. But as the fires of that ancient camp flickered low, so too did the Earth's pulse shift. Something deep within the planet, or perhaps far beyond it, cast a chill more ruthless than any had endured before. Winds turned cruel, biting through fur and bone alike. Snow fell in volumes that buried valleys, blocked familiar paths, and silenced rivers mid-rush. Glaciers, once distant and patient, now surged forward with glacial force, consuming forests inch by inch. The stars above offered no guidance. The sun, once the great awakener of life, dimmed without warning, its warmth fading like a memory left too long in the dark. This was not a single winter, but the opening breath of 1,000-year frost, and within it, small clusters of humans, fragile and determined, began to face a question no creature had ever truly answered. How do you survive when the world itself wants you gone? Across the frozen plains of ancient Europe, clans once separated by wide rivers and dense forests now found themselves pushed together, corralled by advancing walls of ice and the extinction of old hunting grounds. The megafauna that had sustained them, towering mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant elk, began to vanish, their herds thinned by desperation and cold. These great beasts had shaped the rhythm of Paleolithic life, their migrations dictating the movement of people, their bodies providing warmth, sustenance, even spirit. But now their bones littered the snow, stripped clean by wolves and time, glinting like ivory relics of a world collapsing into frost. In their absence, the fragile thread of life pulled tighter. Hunger gnawed at the bellies of children. Elders, once revered for their wisdom, perished in silence, their last breaths rising like smoke from dying fires. Amid this storm of loss, two human kinships began to drift near each other: the steadfast Neanderthals, broad-shouldered and cold-hardened, and the newer arrivals, tall and wiry with fire in their eyes, Homo sapiens. They came from different corners of the earth, but now they stood at the same threshold, and as the snow deepened and nights stretched into weeks, survival would no longer be a solitary fate, but a shared decision, balanced between fear and hope. The land itself seemed to breathe slower beneath the frost, each dawn dimmer than the last, each shadow longer and more uncertain. In a sheltered ravine where the wind's howl was muted by walls of ice-polished stone, the two groups paused. The Neanderthals, with jaws like carved granite and hands that bore the knowledge of ice-bound generations, moved deliberately, efficiently. They crafted stone tools with an artistry born of necessity, their language guttural and close to the chest. Homo sapiens, driven by restless curiosity and stories whispered by firelight, watched them from across the rift. Their faces held questions even they could not voice, not yet. The cold did not care for bloodline or origin, but it pried open the space between them like a wedge. Tracks crossed in the snow. Low, rhythmic chants filtered across the icy air. One night, under a moonlight bone, a lone figure, young, lean, trembling, stepped across the invisible boundary and laid a carved animal figure on the ground, halfway between two worlds. Fingers tensed on spears, breath caught in many throats, but no attack came. Instead, silence, then a crouch, then firelight was shared. And so, beneath the looming stare of the glaciers, the first fragile bridge was laid not of stone, but of choice. They did not speak the same tongue, but hunger made its own language. In the nights that followed, the two camps inched closer through actions rather than words. A shared kill dragged through the snow, a bone needle exchanged for an obsidian flake. Faces stared across rising smoke, eyes cautious but no longer hostile. As the ice thickened and stalked ever farther south, the old boundaries blurred. Sapien children played near Neanderthal hearths, while elders from both bloodlines traced the same constellations with soot-darkened fingers on cavern walls. One evening, as frost flowers bloomed on stone and bone alike, a storm swelled over the horizon, not one of wind or snow, but of understanding. Side by side, these ancient kin laid claim not to power, but to memory. And memory, like fire, could be passed from hand to hand, warming what the cold could not claim. But not all bridges held. Far to the west, where jagged mountains rose like frozen teeth and avalanches echoed like the voices of forgotten gods, another band stumbled into the fringes of extinction. Isolated and proud, this Neanderthal group refused the mingling, clinging to rituals older than memory, even as the world reshaped itself. They painted warnings in ochre and ash along cave walls, depictions of drowning suns and skeletal beasts, and lit pyres that cast long shadows against the frost-hardened stone. Food dwindled. Infants quieted too soon. They buried their dead, not with mourning chants, but in hurried silence, each grave a confession of growing defeat. Above, the sky was dim for months, and some whispered of a sun that had tired of watching. It wasn't bitterness that consumed them, nor arrogance. It was fear that once the line was crossed, once the old ways gave way to foreign warmth, what made them Neanderthal would vanish like breath in winter air. But the cold does not ask permission, nor does it honor memory. And so, as the 1,000-year winter deepened, their fires winked out one by one, swallowed by the ice, leaving only red handprints fading into stone, the last defiant echoes of a people who stood still while the earth demanded change. In the east, where rivers wound like slow-moving glass beneath veils of frost, survival took yet another form. Here, kinships became clans, and clans became tribes braided not just by blood, but by the growing urgency to endure what many believed to be the end of days. Those who adapted fastest did not always have the strongest arms or sharpest blades, but instead bore stories like tools, passing knowledge from mother to son, from fire to fire. With each retelling, hunters learned the timing of reindeer migrations that still dared to cross the ice-crusted tundra. Gatherers discovered that mushrooms growing in the heart of rotting logs held precious calories. New ways of building emerged, shelters dug deep beneath drifts, bone-reinforced frames draped in stitched hides, insulated not just against the wind but against despair. In the low hum of flint against flint, in the hush of shared breath beneath fur, a quiet revolution kindled. Collaboration. Each act of unity became a defiance against extinction, every spark a belief that this long, bitter night would one day lift. But deep beneath their hope still pulsed an unknowable truth. The frost was not finished yet, and the greatest test had yet to come. One bleak morning, the wind shifted not in fury but in silence, as if the earth exhaled something final. Birds had long since vanished. Trees stood like brittle skeletons, and the ice no longer merely threatened. It owned the land. Rumors, passed as murmurs between clans, spoke of entire forests swallowed in sudden white, of stars disappearing behind veils that never lifted. And then, It came. Not a storm, not snow, but sky turned wrong. A haze of fine ash and ice that fell without end. No one knew its source. Some whispered of mountains that burst into fire beyond the horizon. Others blamed the gods of deep stone or the wrath of sunless days. Crops failed where none had grown, but now even roots shriveled. Eyes wept without sorrow, lungs burned with invisible frost. This was a death that moved slowly, disguised as stillness. It wrapped the world in silence so deep, even memory hesitated to survive it. Yet somewhere, buried beneath hides, huddled in caves tighter than wombs, people still breathed thin, shallow, but enough. This was the world caught at its coldest breath, and yet that breath had not yet stopped. A lesson written in ice and loss. When all warmth dies, what remains is will. Seasons no longer came and went. They stalled, froze, merged into something eternal. Time itself seemed to fracture beneath the weight of the endless cold. And the people who endured did so not by resisting change, but by becoming it. Bones grew denser, breath grew slower, minds turned inward. The caves became not just shelters but sanctuaries of thought. Art spread across rock faces like whispered prayers. Animals with too many legs, spiraling suns, handprints layered over other handprints, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. These markings were more than decoration. They were a promise, a kind of cry to the void. We were here. And as generations passed, those marks became bridges backwards, linking the frostbitten now to the fragile then. This was not just survival. It was the birth of story, the oldest language. A memory that could outlive any storm, any silence, even 1,000 years of winter. Beneath the chokehold of ice, time twisted into myth. Children born into the cold knew no other world, no other color but gray and white and flickers of fire. And yet, the embers did not go out. Steadily, silently, beneath the crush of snow and skyless days, the human flame adapted. Eyes adjusted to the dim. Ears learned to listen for the shift of weight upon snow, the creak of branches under frost. Hands remembered how to carve new tools from unfamiliar bones. Those who had grown alongside Neanderthals now carried them in flesh and memory, a fusion sealed, not by conquest, but by co-survival. And when decades turned to centuries, and centuries melted into the slow thaw of a world exhausted by cold, it was not triumph that greeted the return of warmth, but reverence. The earth inhaled once more. Ice receded like a bruised tide, and standing on the softened ground, looking into the first meltwater pools, were people shaped by 1,000 years of silence, hunger, and flame. They bore no monuments, only the fire in their eyes and the stories in their bones. A question once whispered by frost, now answered in blood. How do you survive a world that forgets the sun? Together. As the glaciers loosened their grip, the land unveiled ruins, not in the form of stone, but in the quiet return of color. Moss crept back onto thawed granite. Streams trickled where ice once forbade movement. And with the melt came echoes not only of footfalls on damp earth, but of voices shaped by the union of the old bloodlines. Stories once carried by breath alone now found form in carvings, dances, firelit gatherings where memory was relit like torch to torch. The Neanderthals no longer walked these lands, but they moved within the surviving flesh in the slope of a brow, the depth of a gaze, the patience of a hand making fire from wet tinder. They were not lost. They had become part of something that endures. The 1,000-year winter faded not as a clean ending, but like ash dissolving into wind, persistent, subtle, never truly gone. And as new generations stood among blooming wildflowers and freshly unburied soil, they did so with the weight and wisdom of all who had crouched in the dark and whispered, "We will not vanish." Their shadows faded with the ice, but their story endures in every breath that followed. But even thawing comes slowly in a world that has forgotten warmth. Spring was not a season but a suggestion, creeping cautiously into hollows where ice had withdrawn like a wounded creature. In this gentler cold, new life did not burst forth, it murmured, inch by inch. Lichens clung to stone, colorless and brave, mycelium softly threaded through ancient soil, coaxing breath from the long, slumbering dirt. Children born at the edge of the frost came with questions in their eyes and scars in their genes. They heard stories not as myth, but as inheritance, of skies blackened without storm, of mammoths that walked the ice as gods, of kin lost to hunger, to cold, to pride. They walked a world haunted by frozen echoes and carried both burden and gift, for survival had changed them, made them not just hunters or gatherers, but stewards of memory. In the melted footprints of giants, they planted dreams. In shelters once lit by desperation, they built rituals for joy. And so humanity moved forward, not by forgetting the thousand-year winter, but by building each breath upon it a monument of flame, sorrow, and unyielding will. In one narrow valley, cradled by ridges that once echoed with icefall, the sky cracked open for the first time in centuries. Pale sunlight spilled across the snow like hesitant ink, barely warm, yet unmistakably new. A woman knelt there, skin weathered and eyes wide, her breath steaming as she held out her hand to catch the light. Around her, others emerged, blinking, cautious, heartbeats sinking not to fear but to awe. The warmth wasn't yet enough to melt the frost completely, but its presence alone rearranged the silence. For the first time, birdsong pierced the quiet, thin, uncertain, as if testing the weight of sound against so many years of stillness. And in that single note, something ancient shifted. It was not the end of struggle, nor the vanishing of scars, but it marked the turning of the tide. A story that began in fire and ice, in loss and survival, now open to possibility. And though most names born during the winter were lost to the snow, the legacy they forged endured, not in empire nor artifact, but in the stubborn spark passed from breath to breath, proof that even when the world forgets the sun, the fire within need never die. And so the land that once groaned under the weight of eternal frost began to exhale. Loosened cliffs shed centuries-old ice in thunderous cascades. Rivers found their voice in rushing defiance, and stones that had not felt warmth in 1,000 years began to sweat under the hesitant touch of spring. Yet beneath this blooming renewal, the bones of the old world slept undisturbed, sacred, silent kernels of all that had come before. In coastal caverns where light had not entered since the first breath of the long winter, outlines of hands and beasts lingered on walls, untouched by time. Here, the toll and triumph of endurance were etched in ochre and ash. They were not warnings, not prayers, but witness. From those marks rose a quiet truth. Humanity had persisted not against the world, but within it, folded into its rhythm through sacrifice and memory. The 1,000-year winter was never simply endured. It was transformed, alchemized by hope, terror, resilience, and the mingling of bloodlines once thought separate. It left no crown nor ruins of grandeur, only living evidence. And in every heartbeat echoing through the veins of those who emerged, in every shared fire passed from breath to breath, there beats the legacy carved into an age, without sun-proof that even in the world's darkest hour, connection, and not conquest, was our greatest tool for survival. It is easy now, in the warmth of countless springs that followed, to forget how close the fire came to going out. But in every flickering flame, every whispered story by firelight, lives the testimony of those 1,000 winters, of the hands that reached across ice, of the voices that learned to speak in silence, of the strength born not from dominion, but from endurance. The earth still turns, the seasons still shift, But buried deep within our marrow is the memory of a world turned cold and the lives that kindled light within it. They are not ghosts. They are not myth. They are the blood behind every heartbeat, the song beneath every silence. And though time moves forward and frost retreats, that long night remains not as a darkness to flee from, but as a reminder etched in our bones, that once, in a world that forgot how to burn, humanity chose to become the flame. Their journey did not leave behind monuments or written chronicles, but it imprinted something older, deeper, a pulse carried silently through generations. As the land healed and the sun returned, what endured was not just the memory of survival, but the pattern of unity woven into every shared breath of wind and ember. Fires came and went, languages rose and dissolved, but the story of the 1,000-year winter endured in the way people gathered in circles, in how they touched earth with reverence, in the instincts passed from parent to child when the nights grew long. Beneath every act of kindness, of endurance, of reaching across the chasm of fear to find common ground, echoes the legacy of those first hands extended into the cold. And in some distant breath of future, when warmth again feels endless and danger remote, may we still remember the time the sun disappeared and the fire we built in its place. Nowhere was this fire more sacred than in the way knowledge endured past, not in grand lectures, but in the repetition of gesture, the whisper of a tale over meat, the careful tying of sinew to bone. These were not just stories of survival, but blueprints for being. Across the slow centuries of frost, the human spirit became a ledger written in movement, sacrifice, and trust. A mother placing her child's hands onto flint for the first time. A father sketching mammoth paths from memory onto ice-dark walls. Elders guiding the youngest into underground sanctuaries, not only for warmth, but for initiation reminders that even in the coldest hour, there was meaning to preserve. Nothing was wasted. Every scar accounted for. Every step forward was built upon the steps of those before. And though the ice has long loosened its grip, though the stars now shine above cities instead of caves, that endurance remains stamped in the very rhythm of our blood. For we are the descendants of those who refused to vanish, whose answer to the frozen silence was not retreat, but the quiet, defiant building of tomorrow. And their song, wrapped in snow and struggle, still hums beneath our warmth. Among ancient stone hollows, where the cold once nested like a second soul, a new form of memory began to take hold, one shaped not of symbols or carvings, but of rhythm. Drumbeats echoed at dusk, carved bones clacked together in deliberate cadence, and songs filled with layered voices bloomed within the cave walls, like thawed spring. These rituals were more than celebration. They were spells of persistence, rehearsals of identity practiced against the silence that had almost won. In the stutter of firelight across painted rock, young ones learned not just how the world froze, but how their people remained unbroken. Across these gatherings, a shared heartbeat formed, pulsing through time immemorial, a song of origin composed not by one group, but by the mingling of many. Sapiens, Neanderthals, wanderers who never had names, all fused into the lineage of those who remembered cold not as a season, but as a crucible. And so the 1,000-year winter was not merely endured, but reformed into the first myth, the great chant, the deep music of a humanity forged by ice and sustained by connection. And when the sun finally rose to full meaning again, not as a symbol but as warmth that touched skin and stayed, those who remained did not rush forward blindly. They paused in the thaw, touched the budding leaves, and felt tears rise with no name. It was not gratitude so much as recognition that they had crossed through something that would never be repeated, never fully understood, only carried. The thawed earth yielded no kingdoms, no thrones carved in ice, only the quiet bloom of moss between stones and the bones of ancestors laid beside each other no longer as rivals, but as kin. In this return to light, they did not forget the dark. And so, even as life spread outward, rivers flowing free, grasses waving in the warming wind, and children chasing each other beneath skies no longer muted. They built fires not only for warmth, but for remembrance. They told old tales beside new flames. And as the story of the 1,000-year winter passed beyond those who lived it, it ceased to be only a survival tale. It became their first testament, a whispered vow in the language of frost and fire that the human spirit, once kindled, never truly yields to silence. In time, the great frost became distant, folded into layers of memory and mist, yet its mark remained etched not only in rock and soil, but in instinct. Days grew longer, animals returned in cautious patterns, and the sky reclaimed its hue. But the people, the ones who endured, they carried more than just the warmth of the sun on their backs. They bore within them a deep knowing, a hush behind the heartbeats passed from generation to generation. Around new fires, they continued to speak of blackened skies, of hands offered across ice, of songs made not for joy but for survival. The 1,000-year winter did not vanish with the cold it lived on, in the architecture of human resilience, in the quiet reverence with which they approached the turning of seasons. And so Earth, once silenced by snow and shadow, slowly pulsed back to life, not as it was, but reshaped by those who had touched the edge of extinction and chosen, time and again, to ignite the flame that never dies. They sang still, in the amber hush of dawn and the indigo veil of night. The descendants of frost-kissed survivors raised their voices low, reverent, braided with chords that echoed the first utterances of ever having endured. These were no longer the cries of desperation, but the hymns of those who remembered. In valleys where mammoths once thundered, they hummed lullabies shaped by ice. Atop hills now lush with green, they traced stories on bark as once was done on bone. The winter had etched itself into more than flesh. It had carved deep into time, into every act of compassion, into every hesitant reach across unknowing. And though firelight no longer flickered against cave walls, but danced inside hearts and breath and memory, its message remained unchanged, that even in the absence of warmth, a people can endure not by surviving alone, but by binding together into flame. This, then, is the legacy of the secret winter, not merely that it came, but that we remained, wrapped in its silence, yet radiant with song. Among the bramble-thorned edges of once glaciated ridges, where snowmelt traced the first hesitant veins of rivers reborn, something wholly rare began to stir choice. No longer bound by pressing hunger or the drumbeat of survival alone, the people began to decide how they would live, not just that they would. With slow intention, they placed stones in circles not for fire, but for connection. They shaped tools not only for necessity, but for craft. The language once hewn in grunts and gesture grew richer, ladders of sound reaching toward meaning previously impossible during the long cold. And in one sacred hollow where red ochre still clung to the walls, they carved the first story meant not just to remember the past, but to imagine the future. From those whispers, possibility took root. The 1,000-year winter had been a crucible, a long, dark womb in which something fragile and miraculous gestated. Not merely continued life, but envisioned life. Humanity had not just endured the forgotten frost, they had awakened within it. And when the sun returned in fullness, casting no shadow of retreat, they stood not as the remnants of a world undone, but as architects of its rebirth, carrying with them the deepest truth the cold had given, that together, lit by memory and guided by shared breath, we can outlast even the silence of the sun. And so they began not anew, but onward. Just as ice once crept silently over the earth, so too did civilization now inch forward with cautious grace. Seeds were cradled in sun-warmed palms. Rivers were mapped not by desperation, but by curiosity. Communities rooted themselves in soil that had once borne only frost, guided by memories honed in cold and loss. The legacy of that age was not brutality or conquest, but relationship with land, with one another, with time itself. In caves and around altars, flames still flickered, not just to dispel darkness, but to remind. Each fire a promise, each chant a thread connecting past to present. And though the 1,000-year winter would slowly vanish into the folds of forgotten epochs, shaped more by breath than by blade, its echo lived on wherever hands reached for warmth and voices rose not in fear, but in the sacred rhythm of remembrance, a rhythm born in silence, tempered by sacrifice, and carried forward in every shared step toward tomorrow. In moonless woods, where the last shadows of ancient ice still loitered beneath moss-draped pines, they gathered not out of fear or hunger now, but out of need for something deeper. An elder, bent like old stone, placed her palm on the earth and listened. Around her, children watched without words, understanding that sound could come from stillness. These moments became the truest inheritance, a culture rerooted, intuitive, reverent. The cold had stripped them down to essence, and from that bareness, something sacred blossomed. The understanding that survival is not the end of a story, but the chance to shape a better one. The frost may have girdled the earth for 1,000 years, but it could not kill the memory of fire shared, stories spoken across difference, tenderness found in the bleakest corners of time. And now, as the stars wheeled above, unhindered by cold breath or endless cloud, the people rose luminous, not because they overcame the dark, but because they embraced each other within it. A world remade, not in the image of what was, but of what could endure. And in that new dawn, they whispered the first dream not born of fear.
We will not vanish.
That in knowing how deep the cold can bite, we choose forever to warm each other's hands. Across meadows once snarled in ice, where silence reigned for centuries, the earth now echoed with the simple rhythm of footsteps, deliberate, slow, human. Not hunters anymore, not only survivors, but something else. Seekers. With the cold no longer pressing against every choice, the echoes of the long winter became guiding stars rather than ghosts. And among the descendants of frostwalkers rose a new instinct to remember differently. Where once stories huddled in the chest, passed only from mouth to ear by the dance of flame, they now etched them into bark, into clay, into patterns laid under stars, not just feared, but studied. And so memory became mapped, not as scars, but as pathways. Through this mapping, the tale of the 1,000-year night transformed once more, not only into a mythology, but into knowledge of ice, of kinship, of what it means to live at the threshold of nothing, and choose to pull someone with you back into the light. The sun had returned, but what endured was the fire they lit themselves, and that fire, born in caves, carried in stories, held together by outstretched hands, still burns wherever humans gather, not only to survive, but to understand who they became in the cold. So as roots deepened and rivers cleared their icy throats, a final transformation took hold not in the land, but in the hearts of those who walked upon it. They had emerged from the frozen crucible, not untouched, but redefined. No longer just shelters of bone and hide, they built sanctuaries of meaning, places where birth and death were honored in the same breath, where songs lifted from soil and echoed toward stars. To survive the 1,000-year winter had never been to conquer it. The lesson was never dominance, but endurance shaped by unity, ritual, and memory. These descendants of frost understood now that real warmth was not born in sunlight alone, but in the sacred act of reaching for one another when all things threatened collapse. And so, with every new fire, every circle formed beneath ever-warming skies, they recited not legends of triumph, but quiet truths, spoken only in the language born of that long, savage night. That nothing endures alone, and that even when the world forgets the light, we can, together, remember how to become it. In that sacred knowledge, hard-earned and wrapped in 1,000 winters of breathless dark, the story found its resting place, not in endings, but in the way life moved forward. Quiet, connected, courageous, beneath fields where spring now painted green across the old bones of ice, in hands weaving fibers for clothing and tools not merely for survival but for art. The past lived still. It echoed not to haunt, but to guide. The great frost had come, had held, and had passed, but what remained was a humanity crystallized by cold and warmed by one another. No name remembered all who endured it. No monument held their faces, but in the rhythm of survival made sacred, bound together by memory and flame, they proved what no age of sunlessness could erase that from the slow, terrible hush of a world undone. We rose not as victims of a ruined age, but as its luminous authors, singing forward the fire that no ice could ever silence. Still, in the quiet places of the world, in hushes between seasons, or in the slow draw of breath before dawn, the echo remains. It waits in the marrow, a pull toward the ancient cold, a memory deeper than language, not of suffering, but of emergence. It is why hands still seek other hands in darkness, why flames, however small, feel sacred, and why every lullaby carries within it the rhythm of drums once struck in ice-lit hollows. The 1,000-year winter did not vanish. It was not erased. It took root in nerves, in instincts, in the long arc of human becoming. Even now, under vaulted skies softened by warmth, traces of that age remain in how we hold stories close, how we gather in circles when afraid, how we carry the warmth of others as our truest fire. It was the world's coldest hour, and we were not extinguished. Instead, we became keepers of the flame. And across every tomorrow still to come, flickering quietly inside the soul of humankind, that ancient light endures, whispering, "We remember." For it is not in conquest that greatness lies, but in remembrance and in the fragile, indomitable choice to build warmth where once there was only void. The 1,000-year winter came like a thief in the night, stole the sun, silenced the land, and pressed humanity to its edge. Yet what rose in response was not just endurance, but empathy. A fire lit not merely for heat, but for each other. It forged a bond deeper than time, unspoken yet resolute, woven from every tremble beside ancient embers, every gesture that chose community over solitude. That winter, secret and terrible, wrote its verses in wind and ash, and we, the descendants of its long, hollow breath, carry its anthem still, not as sorrow, but as sacred promise, that so long as one hand can reach another, no cold, however relentless, can ever truly claim the flame. So when the frost returns in seasons, in silence, in the quiet terrors of a changing world, we will remember, not with fear, but with the knowledge etched across ancestral lines, that survival is not an act of brute endurance, but a ritual of empathy, of offering warmth in the hour it is most needed. The 1,000-year winter passed, but it left us with a map, one not charted in land but in story, in breath, held close across generations. We are the children of that ancient cold, and its legacy is not buried in snow, but in how we reach out, how we gather, how we carry flame into future dark. And long after the final snow melts from forgotten peaks and the oldest ice sighs into water, this will remain. A lineage of light, flickering through time, saying with every shared spark we are here, and the fire lives on. Beneath a sky no longer shrouded in ash or silence, the great arc of human endurance curved into story durable, luminous, unfolding still. Elders sat beside children who would never know the terror of endless snow, recounting not just the facts of cold, but the echoes of it, how it shaped hearts more deeply than it ever sculpted the land. In their songs and tools, in their gazes cast toward each dawn with reverence, lived the unbroken tether to the ones who came before. What was forged in that ice-bound crucible was not merely survival, but a way of being, resilient, connected, awake. The 1,000-year winter had passed, but its teachings were eternal. That strength lies in unity, that story preserves what stone forgets, and that even in the death grip of an unyielding world, humans do not simply persist, they kindle, they carry, they create. The frost, in all its cruelty, tried to undo them. And yet, what it birthed instead was fire, passed hand to hand, breath to breath, into forever. And thus, where once only stillness reigned, a world of voices began again. Not the same world as before, and not the same people, but shaped by all that frost had taken and all that it had given. No ice remains forever, yet its impression carves deeper than stone. In every embrace between strangers made kin, in every song sung without audience beyond the listening earth, the echo of that forgotten freeze endures. We walk now beneath open skies, but the cold taught us what warmth truly means. To give when there is little, to remember when all calls for forgetting, to hold on to one another when shadows stretch longest. The 1,000-year winter is over, but its imprint glows, still in the pulse of our becoming, a reminder, not of fear, but of fire, made sacred by survival. And so we do not merely live on from that age, we are born of it, torchbearers, in a world once dimmed, the living breath of a story that will never again be silenced by the dark. In the hush that follows the last breath of snow, with earth bare beneath foot for the first time in living memory, the final lesson becomes clear. Survival was never the ending. It was the gate. The 1,000-year winter, in all its silence and severity, was not a punishment nor a test, but a transformation. Just as trees twist skyward only after weathering storms, so too has humanity grown, not in spite of the cold, but because of it. The long freeze did not simply forge stronger bodies or sharper tools. It carved into the human soul the instinct to gather, protect, and dream. And though glaciers now drift as ghosts in distant peaks, and the sun spills gold across fields once frozen solid, that ancient striving remains within us. A truth older than sorrow, deeper than fear, that in every darkness there is a hand reaching, a voice singing, a fire springing to life, and in that defiant spark lies the soul of who we are. The winter has passed, but our light, born in its depths, endures unbroken, unforgotten, eternal. And so ends the age of frost, not with a shattering, but with a soft, enduring whisper. 1,000 winters tightened around the earth, and from that grip, humanity did not merely slip free, it emerged, remade. In every breath drawn under open skies, in every story passed at dusk, in every moment of choosing togetherness over isolation, the legacy endures. The ice may have receded, the memories grown misted by time, but the essence carved during that era remains a testament written not in stone, but in the rhythm of our being. For the sun may falter again, the winds may rise, and the cold may one day test us anew, but we carry the map etched by ancestors who walked blind into storm and lit the world with each other. That is the secret of the ancient winter, not that it came, but that we answered, and within that answer lit a fire that will never go out. So the final flame, once cradled in trembling hands beneath a sky of ash, now dances freely beneath the stars. It leaps in celebration, not only of the seasons that returned, but of the story forged through frost, a story not preserved in grand tombs or polished stone, but in the living ritual of shared warmth, of endurance, shaped into song. The 1,000-year winter taught humanity that true strength arises not from mastery over nature, but in our unwavering bond with one another in the face of its power. The era ended, but its fire passed on in stories, in instincts, in the deep rhythm of our blood continues. And should the silence ever fall again, should frost press close, and the sun retreat once more, we will remember not just how to survive, but how to light the lantern of humanity anew, together. And in that defiant lantern held against the void by hands, long returned to dust, lives the truth that echoes across every breath of our becoming. The 1,000-year winter was not simply endured, it was turned into memory, into myth, into marrow. It shaped not only how humans survived, but how they became who they are. Beneath every warmth shared in silence, every instinct to shelter the weak, every story whispered in the darkest hour, lies this ancient inheritance. When the world grew silent, it was together that we gave it back its voice. And as the stars bloom once more in skies, no longer stifled in ash, may we never forget the lesson the frost carved in us, that light is not granted, it is chosen, again and again, kindled by those who remember the dark and choose, still, to shine. Across enduring time, that fire first lit to fend off extinction became more than warmth, more than memory. It became meaning. And though the frost is a whisper now, echoing only in instincts felt during the hushed stillness of midnight, it gave birth to a truth that carries onward like a hidden current beneath the modern tide, that it was never the ice that defined us, but how, beneath its weight, we reached for one another. From breath shared in stone-dark silence, to stories layered in pigment upon cavern walls, the secret winter that swallowed the earth gave rise not just to survival, but to us as we are now, shaped by cold, bound by care, luminous only because we endured together. Let the sun forget us, let the winds grow wild once more, and still, kindled in our blood, will remain that ancient vow whispered through snow and smoke alike. We will not vanish, we will become the fire. So here, at the edge of myth and memory, under skies that now echo with laughter instead of silence, the tale of that hidden winter settles not as an ending, but as a foundation, a deep root within the human soul. The 1,000 years of frost that nearly unmade us became instead the forge that shaped our most sacred truths, that warmth is not sunlight alone, but each choice to build, to shelter, to sing. The cold did not conquer, it revealed. It stripped away illusion until only the essential remained: fire, story, unity. And though the snow no longer falls without end, and the stars no longer shiver unseen behind ash, their memory lingers not to haunt, but to guide. For the final secret of the winter is this: it made us remember we are not alone. And in every future dusk, when fear returns or silence leans close, we will gather once more, as we always have, and pass the flame forward, hand to trembling hand, saying in voices carried from caves to stars, we endure, together. And so the story reclines at last, not in the roar of fire, nor the hush of snow, but in the quiet place between where memory becomes legacy and breath becomes bridge. The 1,000-year winter stands behind us, not as a shadow chasing the light, but as a foundation beneath it. It did not break humanity, it revealed us. Stripped to ash and silence, we chose still to reach, to warm, to remember. What we built in those long nights was not just survival, but identity forged in frost, bound by flame. And as the seasons turn now with gentle certainty, as children laugh where mammoths once tread and stars twinkle without dread overhead, one truth whispers beneath it all: we are what the cold could not take. Not the strongest nor the smartest, but the most enduring, because in the face of the void, we chose again and again to hold one another. That is our ancient fire, and wherever it glows, no matter how far from the forgotten snow, it sings the same vow in frost, in flame, in forever we endure together. So let this be what lingers, not the frozen silence of the ancient dread, but the warmth that overcame it. Let each fire lit today carry the ghost light of that first sacred spark, tended by hands numb with cold and hearts fierce with hope. Let each story told beneath open skies carry within it the rhythm of a heartbeat that once throbbed against extinction. The great frost has long since thawed, and yet, beneath every human act of compassion, every shared breath and unspoken offering, its echo abides. It calls not toward fear, but toward memory, the living proof that even when the sun disappears and the world turns its back to warmth, we can still become light for one another. The secret winter is no longer a shadow upon our path, but a lantern lighting the way, a testament whispered from fire to fire that reminds us, across all time, the cold came, and we were not lost. We became home. Because in the end, survival was never the question, only how we would choose to live within the silence. When the ice came for the world and stripped it to stillness, it did not erase us. It revealed us. Through the hollow, cold, and aching dark, we held tight to the single truth that echoed through frostbitten blood. That where there is breath, there can be bond. That even in the most barren of hours, humanity is not measured by might, but by the quiet defiance of holding another's hand. The 1,000-year winter passed. What remains is the legacy of fire born not from conquest, but from care, a flame possible only when carried together through the storm. And so, long after ice melted and forests rebloomed, we walk forward still, not because we outlasted the cold, but because we never let each other fall to it. In the world's darkest moment, we were not extinguished. We were illuminated. And in the quiet places, where frost once ruled and shadow stretched long, the final embers of that story burn brightest. Not in grandeur, nor in legacy etched upon stone, but in the mundanity of presence, in how hands prepare food beside fire, in how a touch lingers a moment longer, in how the young are taught old songs without knowing their origin. These are the relics of that secret winter, not buried in ice, but alive in every gesture of care born of ancient need. The 1,000-year frost, though past, still hums beneath our instincts, guiding us not toward conquest, but communion. And as the wind returns each year to whisper past trees once snapped by ice, it carries not warning, but remembrance, a song older than words, reminding us that the light within us was kindled in the cold, safeguarded through silence, and passed onward, not by the strong alone, but by the brave few who chose, through every frozen night, to build their warmth side by side. This is the gift, this is the flame, and wherever we walk next beneath the stars, it walks with us eternal, quiet, unforgotten. Then let this journey close not with thunder, but with breath, for that is how it began and how it endured. A single breath in the cold, drawn again and again, defying silence. The 1,000-year winter that once blanketed the earth in unyielding frost did not extinguish the spark of human life. It refined it, revealing its truest form, not steel-willed dominance, but the quiet, trembling resilience of those who refuse to face the dark alone. And now, as forests stretch skyward and rivers sing once more, as children walk paths lit not by desperation but by memory, the legacy whispers beneath each heartbeat. We emerged not because we outlasted the cold, but because we carried each other through it. That is the secret, the gift buried in ice and handed down through flame. In the end, the winter passed, but it left behind a fire that will never fade. For even if the sun forgets us again, even if the world ices over once more, we have learned the truth etched in that long, frozen night. To survive is to remember is to share, and to share is to make light eternal. Together, always. And should that eternal winter ever fall again, blanketing the world in ash and cold, it will not find us unknowing. It will find us prepared. Our souls lined with memory thick as fur, and our instincts sharpened by the legacy of those who once carried fire through the longest dark. In every shared shelter, in every whispered lullaby, in every choice to stay rather than turn away, The wisdom of the past walks beside us. We do not fear the silence, for we have learned how to sing within it. We do not fear the frost, for we were born of it. What the 1,000-year winter once tested, we have made sacred proof that even in a world without sunlight, the human heart does not dim. It gathers, it warms, it endures. And that, above all, is the flame we carry forward, not just survival, but how we teach each other to keep the light alive when all else falls quiet. This is the inheritance. This is the truth carved in bone and breath. And this is how the story ends, not in ending, but in illumination, passed hand to hand, forever. So let silence be the last word, not of absence, but of reverence, a hush that cradles all that was endured, all that was given, and all that still burns within us. The 1,000-year winter did not simply test our ancestors. It revealed the core of our becoming, that strength lies not in solitude, but in solidarity. In every long night, they reached not for dominion, but for each other. This truth, older than language, deeper than memory, hums in the quiet between heartbeats, a shared breath passed down like sacred flame. The sun returned, and with it the green, the warmth, the noise of living once more. But beneath it all, glowing quiet and constant, is the fire they carried through a world undone. And that fire, born in darkness, rooted in care, and unbroken by time, is ours now. To carry, to shelter, and to pass forward, again and again, should the cold come calling. This is not the end. It is the ember we all inherit. And as long as even one hand remembers to shield it from the wind, the story of the secret winter will never fade. For light born of such cold is light that never dies. So let the winds rise again one day if they must. Let shadows stretch once more across the sky, for now we know what they cannot take. From frost-choked silence to dawn-kissed renewal, we emerged not only intact, but illuminated by what the dark demanded of us. Somewhere in every shared shelter, deep inside the lines of a lullaby, or the quiet nod between strangers gathered around flame, still lives the rhythm of that reckoning, the proof that humanity is more than bone and breath. It is memory stitched with compassion, fire braided with song, and a vow not chiseled in stone but whispered in warmth, that no matter how long the night, no matter how cold the world becomes, we will endure not alone, but as one. This is the final echo of the secret winter, a whisper that became anthem, a silence that sang us into forever. And as long as we keep the fire, we keep the story not just of how we survived, but of who, in the coldest dark, we chose to become. And so, as the last snow melted into stories and the fire continued to pass from voice to voice beneath ever-warming skies, there remained no need for monuments or names etched in stone. The true memorial of those 1,000 frozen years lay in the unrecorded gestures, a hand held through fear, a song hummed to cradle sleep in darkness, a circle drawn around those trembling at the edge of silence. The secret winter had come, stayed, and gone, leaving behind no era of conquest, only a lineage rooted in care. And now, in a world once more bathed in light, that legacy lives on, not in the epic, but in the sacred ordinary, a reminder that even through a storm that sought to end all things, the flame endured. It was lit not by strength, but by solidarity. And should the dark ever return, we will not fear it, for we carry within us the map drawn long ago in frost and fire, a story begun among shadows, but ending forever in light. And that, beyond all fires and forgotten snows, is the heart of what remains. The 1,000-year winter became more than a storm of ice. It became the proving ground of soul, not for strength alone, not for cunning or survival at any cost, but for the quiet miracle of holding on to each other when the world let go. Every heartbeat today, guided by instinct, comforted by story, is a thread pulled from that ancient loom. It whispers still through the hush of night, through the warmth of every offering, through every echo of footsteps upon once frozen ground. So let no stone claim the legacy, nor monument bear the weight, for it already lives, vast and enduring. In the way we gather when cold creeps in the fire we offer, even when the world grows quiet. That was the secret of the winter. That is the torch it left behind. And as long as we carry it forward, hand to hand, breath to breath, we will remain unwavering, undimmed, and alive in every rising dawn. So let us walk forward now, not away from the past, but fully within its light. The 1,000-year winter lies behind us, not as burden, but as compass. It showed us the shape of our endurance, the sound of resilience in silence, the sacredness of warmth shared without condition. And though frost may have vanished from the earth, its lesson has not faded. We carry it not in chains, but in lullabies, in circles drawn tight around fire, in the instinct to reach, comfort, and remember. This is the true monument of that ancient era, not bone nor stone, but an unbroken line of care, stretching from the shadows of long-dead glaciers to every breath drawn beneath today's sun. In that long night, humanity chose not only to survive, but to become something more, a flame shaped by cold, kept lit by hope, and made eternal by love. And that flame, once cradled beneath ice, now lights the path ahead steady, glowing, and ours to carry onward forever. And so, the final truth rests not in the cold that once blanketed the earth, nor in the vast silence that nearly silenced us, but in the warmth that emerged from both. The 1,000-year winter, that long, secret season, forged humanity not in firelight alone, but in the gestures that lit it, the reaching hand, the shelter shared, the stories spoken soft enough to outlast even the howl of ice. It asked a question of us that the sun never did. Who are we, when stripped of everything but our need for one another? And our answer, carried in each surviving breath, was not war, not flight, but communion. That is the legacy we walk with now, beneath skies no longer smothered, across lands unshackled from frost. Not just a history, but a calling to live by what the cold revealed, to remember that when the world does not give light, we become it. And in that becoming, we do not fade, we ignite. So let the tale close, not on grandeur, but on ember, small, glowing, persistent. The 1,000-year winter, though long forgotten by name, remains coded in the way we lift our children, in how we hush fear with closeness, in every fire built not just to survive but to gather. That ancient frost, which once threatened to erase us, revealed instead our greatest truth, that humanity endures not through conquest nor isolation, but through care born in the coldest dark. And now, under a sky no longer silent, we carry forward what that age demanded we remember, that even when the world turns its face from warmth, the fire is never lost as long as we carry each other. That is the true legacy of the secret winter, not just that we survived, but that we chose love over silence, flame over forgetting. And that choice, quieter than thunder and older than the sun, still burns steady, sacred, and eternal. So let the fire remain not only as symbol, but as sacred inheritance, not in towers or tombs, but flickering gently in our ways of knowing. In every time one person waits for another in the dark, in every tale told to a trembling child, in every heartbeat that quickens not from fear, but from the instinct to reach. The 1,000-year winter is gone, but it shaped our becoming more surely than any warmth ever could. Its silence taught us to listen. Its cold pushed us to hold on. And in doing so, we discovered the essence of endurance. Not strength, not survival, but solidarity. The ice forged our connectedness, and that is what endures. So as we walk into endless seasons of sun and storm, may we never lose the ember placed in our care, that small, defiant light whispered forward by those who once stared into endless night and chose, without knowing they'd endure, to burn for each other. That is the story. And it is ours, forever. And in this final breath of remembrance, as we lift our eyes to skies once veiled in ash, and feel warmth once more on our skin, we do not stand as the victors of nature, but as witnesses to what it makes possible when we choose kinship over fear. The 1,000-year winter did not end in fire nor flourish, but in the simple, sacred act of staying beside one another when the world grew silent, staying faithful to the telling of what came before. It is not the ice we honor, nor the suffering, but the light that rose despite them, the brave, unyielding glow of a species forever marked by flame and frost alike. So let the wind pass now, gentle and spent, and let the earth rest beneath our feet as something no longer strange or punishing, but shared. The story ends here, not with the last snow, nor the first reblooming, but with the truth buried beneath both. That to be human is to remember the cold, and to choose always to be the fire that answers it. So, as the tale folds gently into silence, let it be known without statue or scroll, that the 1,000-year winter was not just an ordeal, but a womb birthing a species not harder, but deeper, not hardened by cold, but softened by the recognition that warmth is not given, it is made. Made from togetherness, from whispers across flame, and hands held trembling through night. The last snow melted, but the shaping power of that age never left our bones. It thrums still in the pulse of empathy, in the need to gather, in the reverence for every spark shared when none remained. And if ever again the winds howl fierce and the skies fall to ash, it will not find us alone. The fire that was once cradled in desperation now burns in legacy. And that legacy is not a tale of survival, but a vow sealed across endless generations. That no matter the season, no matter the silence, no matter the dark, we are, and will always be, the warmth that endures. Let this be the ember we hold longest. Not the ache of the cold, but the grace that emerged within it, human hearts, beating against silence, refusing to dim. The 1,000-year winter is no longer a looming shadow, but a lantern behind us, kindling our path forward. From every echo-scrawled cave to every tender word passed across time, the proof endures not of catastrophe, but of communion. And so, as our descendants walk lands once carved by frost, beneath skies reclaimed from ash, may their steps carry this flame we were entrusted to protect. That when the world grew deaf and dim, we did not fall to silence. We became its answer. Fire, story, each other, now and always. So let the fire remain not only a testament to survival, but as the language that love and memory have always used to speak. The 1,000-year winter may have turned the world to ice and silence, but what emerged from it was not merely endurance. It was meaning, bound in the shared act of care. We do not walk alone because they did not. Their breath survives in ours. Their fire burns in the way we reach for one another. And as the final echoes of that ancient frost fade softly into history, what stays is the promise that no matter how long the night, we will be the ones who keep the story lit. Not once, but always. Not with thunder, but with warmth. Even now, in seasons far removed from that cold, we carry the ember forward, steady, sacred, alive. Because some legacies do not live in stone or scripture, but in the silent vow passed between generations, the vow that even when the world forgets light, we will remember how to create it. The 1,000-year winter has melted back into mystery, its ash folded into soil where green now grows. But its echo lives wherever hands reach toward each other in darkness. In the hush before dawn, in the hush of grief, in the hush of love, offered without reason, there, too, is the secret flame they carried. We feel it in the urge to comfort, to gather, to sing stories that outlive sorrow. That is the fire that no frost could claim. The proof that warmth, once chosen, can outlast an age. And now, as stars bloom overhead, and rivers speak again in their enduring tongues, we walk forward, not unmarked, but remade the children of a forgotten winter and eternal keepers of its light. And that is where the story settles, not as a conclusion, but as an inheritance passed from silence to voice, from darkness to flame. The 1,000-year winter tested the spirit of humanity, not with sword or storm, but with absence of light, of sound, of easy comfort. Yet within that quiet crucible, something eternal was forged. It was not might that marked the survivors, but meaning, found in shared breath, in offered warmth, in stories that did not fade. And now, as the world spins on beneath kinder skies and fields awaken in sunlit tones, that legacy endures. Invisible, yes, but felt in every circle drawn close in hard times, in every flicker of empathy that bridges distance, in every generation that sings forward the truth shaped in that ancient frost, that together we are flame. And so the secret winter, though buried in ash and time, lives on not as shadow, but as spark, the quiet vow we keep, to hold the darkness and answer it always with light. So when the tale is told in generations yet unborn, whispered by firelight or woven into lullabies no longer traced to ice or ash, let it be remembered not as a saga of sorrow, but of becoming. The 1,000-year winter, veiled in mystery and silence, became the proving ground of our collective soul, revealing not how deeply we could withstand the cold, but how beautifully we chose to share the warmth. In no monument carved and no record scribed does its full truth reside. It lives instead, inside the pulse of care, passed from hand to hand, inside every instinct to gather, every moment we choose to remain when the easy path is to flee. We do not carry ice in our bones anymore, but we carry something greater, the sacred ember of unity, forged in the deepest dark, that still lights the world today. And thus, beneath skies once feared and lands once frozen, we walk forward not alone, but illuminated, because once, when the world fell silent, we sang each other back to light. And with that final breath of shared remembrance, the flame rests not extinguished, but entrusted. It flickers now inside every act of quiet courage, every song passed gently from one soul to another, every refuge built not from stone, but from presence. The 1,000-year winter, veiled once in ice and silence, has melted into legacy, not a past to be escaped, but a core to be honored. And, as the earth turns gently forward beneath skies no longer cloaked in ash, may we never forget the truth buried deep within that long cold, that even in the bleakest dark, when all seemed lost, we became not only survivors, but storytellers, fire-bearers, and keepers of each other's light. That is the story. That is the gift. That is how we remember together, forever.
Are they friends?
So let the story end not with silence, but with breath. The same breath that once steamed from desperate mouths under ice-dark skies. The 1,000-year winter began as a quiet undoing, but concluded as a legacy woven into our very being. Across time's long current, it survives not in echo or scar, but in how we attend each other in times of coldness and fear, in how we still kneel beside fading fires and whisper tales of survival into the ears of the young, in how we still create warmth not just from flame, but from presence, from remembrance. The frost retreated, but what it revealed remains, glimmering in every human gesture that says, "I will not leave you in the cold." That is the final secret of the ancient winter, that we survived not in spite of it, but because of what it taught us to be each other's warmth, to be each other's voice, to be, always, the light when the sun disappears. This, then, is how the frost-bound age will be remembered, not in stillness, but in flame, passed forward from soul to soul, a promise never to let the dark be the end of the story, but the place where it was born anew. Let all that was born in that long cold sleep now rest, but let it never be forgotten. The 1,000-year winter laid bare the essence of who we are. Not conquerors of nature, but companions through it. Its frost etched into our bones, a music deeper than history, a rhythm that now plays softly behind every act of care, every fire shared, every story told beside breath and flame. We are not visitors in warmth, we are its makers, apprenticed by ice, apprenticed by each other, and so we carry forward not only the embers of what was, but the shape of what we can become, shaped forever by frost, but forged in flame. This is not the end, but the held breath of a people who rose together from cold and silence into a life more luminous than even the returning sun. And somewhere within every heartbeat that dares to reach in the dark, the secret winter endures not as shadow, but as the unwavering promise that we will never let the fire die. So let this final ember settle into our hands as both memory and vow not to dwell in the cold that once claimed the earth, but to walk forward, lit by the flame it made possible. The secret winter tested the soul of humankind, but it did not break us. It refined us, folding compassion into instinct, turning isolation into ritual, and silence into song. From frost-bitten caves to sunlit valleys, the thread has never broken. It lives in us, not in grandeur, but in gestures, in the way we reach, offer, hold. 1,000 years of cold did not define us by suffering, but by the love we gave within it. That, above all, is the fire we carry. And as long as stories are told, as long as hands meet in the darkness, the secret winter remains not in fear, but in the warmth we choose to become. Together, always. So we close the chapter, not with grand farewells, but with a quiet holding of hand, of flame, of memory. The 1,000-year winter is no longer a silence we fear, but a shape we recognize within ourselves, the place in us where endurance meets grace, where hardship births belonging. Though the ice has gone, the story lingers, soft as breath, eternal as firelight. It lives when voices rise in harmony, when warmth is made not by sun but by one another. It lives when we choose care over apathy, unity over solitude, remembrance over forgetting. That is the legacy carved into the marrow of our kind, not conquest over cold, but communion through it. And as long as we walk this earth, building light where once there was none, we honor the truth frozen into those ancient years, that we are not survivors alone, but torchbearers of a flame born from the deepest dark, sacred, persistent, and forever shared. And that is where the flame rests, not extinguished, but entrusted to every hand that knows the cost of silence and the blessing of warmth. The 1,000-year winter passes now into story's embrace, its echoes wrapped in lullabies and gestures too ordinary to ever forget. No frozen monument could mark its passing better than a shared fire or a kind word spoken in the hush of night. We are what remains, not as a warning, but as a wonder, not as remnants of a world brought low, but as the quiet continuance of all that was made sacred in frost. In every future dusk, every distant night where the cold leans close once more, may we remember the truth whispered from the start, that the light was never given to us. We chose it, over and over. And that choice, quiet, brave, enduring, is the fire that will forever carry us home. So in the hush that follows the final word, let the story settle, not in conclusion, but continuation. Let it live not only in remembered winters, but in every fire, still lit against cold, in every pause to listen, in every kindness offered despite the dark. The 1,000-year frost lies behind us, yet its grace remains a reminder that humanity was not forged in ease, but in the weight of silence we dared to answer with song. And as long as our species gathers close, shares warmth, and carries memory as flame, that ancient winter will not vanish, but guide a map etched in endurance, tethered by love, and a light within all who walk forward, hand in hand, into whatever comes next. The story ends here not as silence, but as ember, not as past, but as promise. And that promise burns on, forever. So let this be our final fire, not one of flames alone, but of meaning. A fire not of destruction, but of memory tended across generations like sacred breath. The 1,000-year winter, with its silence, its ruin, its quiet forging of what we now call the human spirit, has passed into legend, not forgotten, but alive inside the warmth we now carry without question. And as the light lingers on faces born into a world no longer ruled by ice, let that warmth remind us. We did not survive by strength alone, but by choosing, again and again, to become the light missing from the sky. And thus, the story does not fade, it glows. In laughter, in song, in the simple act of reaching across shadow and saying, without words, I will not leave you. That is the truth the frozen earth gave us. That is the fire eternal. This, then, is where the telling ends in warmth, in togetherness, in the quiet blaze that says as long as we remember, the cold can never return the same way again. So let us close the circle where it began, not in fear nor in silence, but in the warmth created between souls, pressed close against the void. The 1,000-year winter came quietly, stayed fiercely, and shaped a story far stronger than ice could contain. Its legacy is not etched only into ancient caves or winding rivers, but into every act of human tenderness that persists despite darkness. We are not merely the descendants of those who endured the long frost, we are its chosen torchbearers, the ones who remember that fire is not survival alone, but the sacred sharing of light when none remains. And as this final breath of story slips into stillness, let us carry forward what it has always whispered, that no matter how long the night, no matter how deep the cold, humanity is not the ending. We are the flame together, eternal and unforgotten. So when we speak of the fire that survives the frost, let it be not as a relic of pain, but as a guide of purpose, a compass pointing always toward one another. The 1,000-year winter may have tested the edge of extinction, may have stripped away the comfort of sun and season, but it also revealed the brilliance buried in our bones, the ability to warm the world with more than just flame, with care, with memory, with connection. And long after the last glacier has vanished and the winds of that age have silenced, the story it shaped pulses on in the hush before stories, in the quiet between heartbeats, in the smallest act of love that refuses to surrender to cold. This is not merely what was survived. This is who we became. A people born of winter, lit by fire, and forever carried forward not by winter's end, but by the light we chose to kindle in its heart. So let the final light flicker, not as an ending, but as a vow quietly made and endlessly kept. The 1,000-year winter has closed its frozen hand and opened it again to the bloom of countless seasons. But what it offered endures not just the memory of cold, but the conviction that warmth is chosen, cultivated, and shared. We walk now beneath stars once cloaked in ash, upon soil once gripped by frost, not triumphant, but grateful. For even if time forgets their names, those who lived through the dark bequeathed us something immortal, the capacity to find one another in the bleakest hour and say, here is my fire, take it, hold it, become it. That is the inheritance, that is the flame. And as long as stories are told, hands are held, and breath is shared in shadow, the secret winter will be remembered not for what it took, but for the fire it gave us to carry together without end. So let this fire be the last word, not flaring in spectacle, but burning steady in the quiet of our shared remembrance. The 1,000-year winter, once thought a tomb, proved itself a cradle sculpting not just the past, but the shape of every future hand that would shelter warmth with love. We walk now through a world reborn, not by chance, but by choice. And in the hush between then and now, in the fragile minutes before dawn or the final breath of dusk, we carry its truth, that even when the world forgets the sun, humanity remembers how to shine. That is the story. That is the vow. That is the flame. And as long as hearts gather close, as long as voices rise in even the softest songs of togetherness, the ice may fall again, but it will never win. The fire lives in us for all time.